Will the ban on the export of scrap metal help reduce theft and vandalism of public infrastructure? We must remember that the proposed ban is not the first one. In July 2020, government imposed an outright ban on the export of scrap metal. Now, while this may bring down prices, it may not necessarily result in fewer cases of destruction of infrastructure for scrap metal. That is the concern. That's because the majority of foot soldiers who are involved in these crimes do it for their survival, and most scrap dealers are used to keeping stock. To discuss, we're joined by SABC News' economics editor, Tsepo Mangwai. Great to have you with us on a Monday as usual. Firstly, could you comment on the unemployment stats? Because it's coming out tomorrow, so that's a big figure that we will be watching.
Yes, the unemployment rate in South Africa, it's still expected to remain very, very high. Most economists are focusing around 35% unemployment rate.
It's staggering.
It is. I'm sure there are sectors that are struggling, and they may have not, as a precaution, because of this current uncertainty. Although things were looking up earlier in this year, many companies took a precaution and not take as much. And also we know that many companies are now taking people on temporary basis. So those figures are likely to reflect that. But on the other hand, when you look at company results, you realize that many of our top 40 have been doing exceptionally well. Of course, they are cognizant of the challenges that consumers are facing. But if you look at it, they continue to declare dividends, which is good. But there are signs that unemployment jobs will come under pressure. But let's wait for the numbers to come out, and I'm sure they'll tell us.
And that of course affects workers. If people aren't too sure about the future, like you say, they don't make long-term plans in terms of hiring people as well. All right, let's talk about, let's put this in context. That is why a lot of people are having to resort to do what they can. And some are involved in scrap metal, in recycling, in collecting what they can and selling it. But let's talk about the ban firstly. What sort of difference could it make or not make?
Well, it's unlikely to make a difference in terms of curbing crimes that are related to scrap metal. Remember, Francis, many of these people, they do it because they just want something on the table. They just want to earn something for that day. Although there are organized crimes who would go for bigger, heavier cables, and they are armed. But majority of those crimes are done by people who just want to survive. So I think there's a need to look at crime, for example, and controlling the crime related to scrap metal. Number one, I can't say most, but quite a number of them, of scrap dealers, they still pay in cash. So you go there with many tons of scrap metals that you have, they pay you in cash, you go home. And we know that cash is a problem because you can't trace the source of money and you can't trace anything. So it's a challenge around that. And also it has to do with the police as well. Often around the scrap, not far from this recyclers, you'd find police stationed around there. And all they do is they would stop, cars that look like they're overweight, they've got a lot of weight on them, and then ask for bribes. It's a challenge that they have. The police must be able to enter recycling companies and search. It currently is difficult. Some of them, they can't enter because they need a search warrant. And by the time they hear of something suspicious, it's too late. And that copper is probably broken into small pieces. You can't even see the mark. So, it's going to be a long way to
That's what we've heard before. Things can be melted down and then you can't trace where they come from. So you're saying that the trick is to protect infrastructure. A lot of questions being asked. Why wasn't our rail infrastructure protected when it was being pulled apart? And then, yes, be concerned about the big dealers that are able to melt down and export and things like that?
Yeah, I mean, there are good recyclers out there who are doing things according to the book, who demand that, guys who come in to sell the scrap, there must be some evidence to show that it was obtained legally. But some of them would ask for proof of evidence that is actually, not obtained legally in order to be able to sell it to those guys who are doing things according to the book.
Yeah.
But it's still a big challenge in terms of whether the ban. The other important point that I would like to raise is that most scrap dealers they keep stock for quite a long time before they can fill those heavy containers in order to be exported. So having to make them wait for 6 months or so, it's something that they can factor into their production quite easily, and it will benefit them more because it simply means they will buy at a much discounted price, because the moment you stop the export, prices will plummet, but people will continue selling. So they will accumulate a lot of stock. I mean, if you have driven past any recycling company, you see heaps and heaps of steel. Some have been there for months and months, because some is for speculation, others is just to wait for prices to achieve a certain level, and then they're able to sell. So it's likely that it will benefit.
That's interesting. So an unintended consequence could be that some of the illegal guys actually benefit. I mean, how attractive is scrap metal?
Well, currently, remember, scrap metal is linked to the price of commodities, your gold and others. And we've seen a rally. I mean, many of them have jumped in recent months on the back of Ukraine and so forth. So scrap metals actually mirror those prices. I mean, you look at copper, for example, the shiny copper, it touched 170 kg. About 3 months ago. It came down currently. I'm talking about prices for guys on the streets. 120, that's how much a guy on the street walks into a recycling with, 2 ton or a ton of copper.
120.
120, that's how much they will pay him in cash, and he goes home. You look at, for example, a rim, aluminium rim, it will sell for around 2 rand per kg. Steel, it's 4 rand per kg. So the aluminium can is about 20 rand. So the price are actually very attractive. They have come down. But they remain quite attractive for ordinary people who actually don't have any means.
Yeah, any other means, yeah.
Exactly, to consider.
All right, well, thank you for that update. Looking at the moves to ban the export of scrap metal, SABC News' economics editor, Tsepo Mangwa.